On the morning of March 23, 1936, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia drove a ceremonial pickaxe into the pavement at the corner of 6th Avenue and 33rd Street. Flashbulbs popped. A crowd of politicians and engineers applauded. But 60 feet below them, in a tunnel already carved from Manhattan schist, a Caterpillar 35 crawler tractor sat idle on a flat car waiting. It had arrived the previous week, not driven in but lowered in pieces through a construction shaft barely 12 feet wide. Its tracks came down first, wrapped in canvas. Then the engine block dangling from a derrick. Then the blade, the radiator, the operator's seat. Sandhogs bolted it together by the light of hanging Edison bulbs deep beneath Herald Square. That machine would not see the sky again for 11 years. The story of New York's IND Sixth Avenue Line is, by any measure, the most complicated piece of subway engineering ever attempted beneath an American city. 2.5 miles of 4-track tunnel threaded like a needle through a tangle of existing infrastructure that would make a surgeon wince. The Hudson and Manhattan Railroad tubes ran directly under 6th Avenue, built in 1908. The BMT Broadway line crossed at multiple points. The Catskill Aqueduct, a critical artery in New York's water supply, sat under the avenue carrying 500 million gallons a day to Brooklyn and Queens. Sewer mains, gas lines, electrical conduits, steam pipes, the underground of Midtown Manhattan in 1936 was already a dense spaghetti of iron and concrete. And the city wanted to punch a 4-track subway right through the middle of it. The original idea dated back to 1922 when Mayor John Hyland proposed over 100 miles of city-owned subway to compete with the private IRT and BMT systems. While the independent subway system, the IND, was his weapon. The 8th Avenue line, the system's spine, opened without ceremony at 1 minute past midnight on September 10, 1932. But the 6th Avenue trunk, the line that would truly challenge the elevated railway rumbling above it, kept getting delayed. The Hudson and Manhattan Railroad refused to surrender their tunnels. Negotiations dragged from 1924 to 1930 before the city finally agreed to build the IND local tracks around the existing H&M tubes, squeezing new tunnels into whatever slivers of underground real estate remained. Express tracks would come later, shoved even deeper beneath both the IND locals and the H&M. Construction began in earnest in 1936 with $23.16 million from the Federal Public Works Administration, one of the largest New Deal infrastructure grants in the country. The work ran 24 hours a day. Morning crews drilled blast holes into the bedrock. Night crews detonated small charges of dynamite, no more than a few sticks at a time, because anything larger risked cracking the Catskill Aqueduct and cutting water to 2 boroughs. Day crews hauled rubble out through the shafts, bucket by bucket, truck by truck, while above them 6th Avenue traffic rolled over temporary wooden decking as if nothing were happening below. Under this video, you'll see a subscribe button, a small action with a big meaning. By pressing it, you're not only supporting the creation of more content like this, but you're also becoming part of the very exchange we've been talking about, giving and receiving in harmony. It's not about the size of the action to us, it's about the meaning. A simple subscription tells me these words reached you. It tells me that the effort, the late nights, and the discipline to bring this message forward mattered to someone on the other side of the screen. If you want to see how this buried machine and the men around it carved a subway through the most congested underground in the world, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to 1936. The Caterpillar 35 was not a large machine by modern standards. It weighed roughly 9,500 pounds. Powered by a 4-cylinder diesel producing about 36 horsepower, its blade could push maybe 2 cubic yards of spoil at a time. But underground, in tunnels where headroom rarely exceeded 14 feet, it was a workhorse. It shoved blasted rock toward the muck trains, small rail cars pulled by electric locomotives that hauled debris to the construction shafts. It graded tunnel floors flat enough for the formwork that would carry concrete. It dragged steel beams into position. And when crews finished a section and moved deeper into the avenue, the bulldozer simply clanked forward with them, never turning around, never coming up for air. The men who ran these machines were a breed apart. They called themselves sandhogs, a name inherited from the compressed air workers who had dug the original IRT tunnels at the turn of the century. By the 1930s, many were Italian and Irish immigrants, men from Calabria and County Cork, who had come to New York looking for any work at all and found it in the most dangerous place the city had to offer. Black laborers made up a growing share of the workforce, typically assigned the most hazardous jobs, working closest to the blasting face, handling the muck carts, breathing the worst of the dust. The pay was decent for Depression-era New York. A sandhog could earn around $8 a day, nearly twice what a surface laborer made. But the price was steep. An underground shift lasted 8 hours. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, dynamite residue, and wet stone. Sound bounced off the rock walls and never fully died. The clang of steel, the rumble of the bulldozer's tracks, the distant thump of detonations in the next section. Temperatures near the rock face could hit 95 degrees in summer, even 60 feet below the street, because the heat had nowhere to go. Ventilation fans pushed stale air through canvas ducts, but the relief was marginal at best. Men came up from their shifts coughing, ears ringing, coveralls soaked through. The engineering challenges were staggering. At 14th Street, the new 6th Avenue tunnel had to be woven between the existing path tubes above and the BMT Canarsie line crossing on a perpendicular axis. Engineers built the IND local tracks first, fitting them into the narrow gap between the two older tunnels like puzzle pieces. At 34th Street, the 4-track section transitioned to 2 tracks, dropping beneath the H&M tubes at a gradient steep enough to clear the older infrastructure, but gentle enough for loaded subway cars. The section between 41st and 47th Streets had to dodge the foundations of Rockefeller Center. North of 47th Street, Belmouth tunnels were constructed for a future extension under Central Park, an extension that was budgeted at $34.9 million in 1940 but would never be built. Through all of this, the bulldozer worked. Yes, when one section was completed and concreted, the machine was walked along the unfinished tunnel bed to the next excavation zone. There was no way to bring it back to the surface without disassembling it, and there was no reason to. It was needed underground. Its engine was maintained in place, oil changes performed by mechanics lying on their backs in the tunnel, filters replaced by lamplight, fuel brought down in 50-gallon drums lowered through the shafts. The blade was re-edged twice during its underground career, the cutting edge worn down to nothing by years of shoving Manhattan bedrock. By November 1937, the section north of 33rd Street had mostly been excavated. Track-laying crews followed close behind the tunnelers, bolting rails to concrete ties. Tile workers began finishing the station walls. The signature 6th Avenue stations with their clean IND-style tile work and wide platforms designed for 10-car trains. On December 5, 1938, the IRT's 6th Avenue Elevated made its final run. A steam-powered relic dismantled to make way for the subway that had been built directly beneath it. And on December 15, 1940, the IND Sixth Avenue Line opened for revenue service from 47th to 51st Streets to West 4th Street. Mayor LaGuardia rode the first train 4 years after he had swung that pickaxe. But the machine stayed down. The 6th Avenue Line's opening didn't end construction underground. There were still connections to be built, ventilation systems to be finished, emergency exits to be completed, and provisions for future extensions to be roughed in. The stub tunnels north of 47th to 51st Streets, those bell mouths pointing toward a Central Park extension that planners still believed would happen, needed grading and finishing. Utility passages between the IND and the older PATH tubes required excavation. The bulldozer continued pushing spoil and grading floors in these secondary tunnels well into 1941, sometimes with just a single operator and a small crew of laborers working in sections of the underground that no passenger would ever see. It was solitary, unglamorous work. The crowds and the ribbon cuttings belonged to the world above. Down here, there was only rock, concrete, and a machine that kept moving forward because nobody had told it to stop. When the United States entered the war that December, construction labor and materials were diverted to the military effort, and remaining subway work ground to a halt. The Caterpillar was finally disassembled in the spring of 1941 and hoisted to the surface through a shaft near West 4th Street. 11 years after it had been lowered underground in pieces, it emerged into daylight. Battered, oil-stained, its paint long gone, its tracks worn thin, its diesel engine overhauled so many times the mechanics had lost count. One of the men who had originally assembled it underground were mostly gone, transferred to other jobs, enlisted or retired. The machine was trucked to a salvage yard in New Jersey. What happened to it after that, nobody recorded. The IND Sixth Avenue Line remains one of the engineering marvels of the 20th century. It carries the B, D, F, and M trains today, nearly 1 million riders passing through it every weekday without a thought for what it took to build. The Catskill Aqueduct still runs beneath the avenue, undamaged. The path tubes, now operated by the Port Authority, still cross the IND tunnels at 14th and 30th Streets. And somewhere in the geology of Midtown Manhattan, buried in the concrete and steel that holds the tunnel together, are the scratches and scrapes left by a machine that spent more than a decade in darkness doing work that the city above never saw. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us preserve these histories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from.